night and asked if we could have this program here. Felice Gelman was an organizer of the Gaza Freedom March that was in Cairo at the end of last year, and she is organizing support here in New York and other places for the Gaza, the Free Gaza movement that you're going to hear about tonight. Felice will introduce our speakers.
Well, thanks. You're convinced, the size of the turnout here has convinced me there's absolutely no point in organizing anything far in advance. And second, I just want to say again to Mary and Linda, thank you so much. You are truly a lifeline. I don't know how many people you can call on Saturday and have them offer you a space for an event that's only 4 or 5 days away. And so it was a tremendous relief to me to have the support of the All Souls Peace and Justice Task Force in trying to bring this story to people in New York City. So I'm just incredibly grateful to them, and I hope that everyone is, gives them a little something for the use of this hall and their terrific response. Tonight, we are going to be hearing from 2 amazing people. Anne Wright, who will speak first, she is a retired U.S. Army Colonel. She is a retired diplomat. She represented the United States in very senior positions in a number of missions in pretty difficult places around the world. And she resigned from the service in protest against the Iraq War, among other things, but against what she saw as the problems with U.S. policy. So you can already see she's a brave and courageous individual. And I have had the honor of going with Anne to Gaza and being with her on the Gaza Freedom March in Cairo. She's a real rock and a very knowledgeable person. So you'll hear first from her. She was on the Flotilla. She was one of the people who were when the boats were hijacked and the people were kidnapped by the Israeli forces. She was one of those, and she will tell her story. Now, our second speaker is Adam Shapiro. Adam is a director of the Free Gaza movement. He is one of the organizers of, one of the organizers who put in years of work to raise the money, acquire the boats and the humanitarian aid, and deal with the extremely complicated bureaucracy that's required to take a ship anywhere, much less to try to break the siege of Gaza. And Adam was also a founder of the International Solidarity Movement, and I guess I have to say he is distinguished as well by being married to the great Huwaida Araf. So Adam will speak second. We're going to try to have the speakers speak for just until a little bit after 8, and then we will have, so that'll be pretty much basically about a half hour apiece, and then we're going to have kind of an open question and answer period, which Laurie Arbiter, who has been a key organizer in New York for all of the support for the Free Gaza Flotilla, will moderate. And so she'll call on people, and you'll ask questions, and hopefully our time is limited here. We need to be out of here by 9 o'clock, so hopefully people will be respectful of the time and just ask short questions and get great answers from our speakers. So first, Anne Wright, and thank you very much.
You're most kind, thank you. Holy smoke, who would have thought that all of you all would be coming out on such short notice and on a rainy night? And it just goes to show how much concern there is going on right now about what is happening in Gaza. The main thing we're talking about tonight is a siege, trying to break a siege of Gaza, a siege that's been going on for years, a siege that is blockading 1.5 million people in a tiny little area of 25 miles long, 5 miles wide, a place where a year and a half ago the Israeli military attacked Gaza and killed 1,440 people, wounded 5,000 left, 50,000 homeless, and in that year and a half, virtually no construction, reconstruction supplies have gone in. The siege of Gaza, that means that Gaza is supported now through tunnels, hundreds of tunnels going under the Egyptian border. And a group of people, a tremendous group of people, that represented tonight by Adam Shapiro, a tremendous group of people that have been organizing through the Free Gaza movement of taking boats in to try to break the siege, the siege by sea, to try to bring boats in as a symbolic measure, really to say these borders cannot be closed. And they've been doing that since 2008. I am a newcomer to that group. This is the first time I've been on any of the Free Gaza boats, and I will tell you that having been an organizer on a lot of different projects, that the Free Gaza group has done an incredible thing of being able to fundraise to buy, for God's sake, boats. I mean, how many of you all have ever fundraised? You know, it's something to be able to buy a camera for your organization, or to, you know, get a bus to go down to Washington for a march. I mean, we think we're doing big things there. How about trying to fundraise for a boat? A boat, and then to have it all the way out in the Mediterranean, and the logistics of how you move a boat all the way into the area around Gaza, and trying to get people to come on the boats, to risk their lives, really, to come on those boats, to be the people of conscience of the world, to say we refuse to let the siege of Gaza stand. And then after, I think it's like 8 or 10 missions that they've done since the summer of 2008, and then Adam will tell you the whole history of it, but when they got this idea that let's just not take one boat or two boats, let's do a flotilla. Well, that's when I heard that word flotilla. I was thinking, you know, I want to see this one. How in the world can they organize, I mean, international coalitions of bringing people together from all over the world? And as it turned out, nearly 750 people, and it was supposed to be 8 ships at once going in. Turned out to be 6 ships. 6 ships, followed 4 days later by another ship. 7 ships going into the Gaza area in a short period of time. And then, as we all know what happened, the Israeli military meeting that flotilla of ships, meeting the flotilla of ships in international waters. I was on one of the smaller ships, the Challenger. It was one of the Free Gaza ships. We had Challenger 1, Challenger 2. Both of those ships left Crete, the island just south of one of the Greek islands in the south. Both of those ships left on the same day, and within 12 hours of our leaving the port of Crete, both of the ships developed steering problems. Both of them at virtually the same time. For the next 12, 14 hours, the captains of both of those ships maneuvered the ships, not using a wheel, but using the motors to guide the ships. Motors like this. And that's the way we were going across the Mediterranean, this way and then that way. But isn't that odd that both sets of steering gave out at virtually the same time? One of the ships went on into Crete and to have the steering mechanism fixed. The ship I was on, Challenger 2, went to the meeting place, a place out in the Mediterranean where all of these ships were together and then form a flotilla and go toward the Gaza coast. We were on our ship, we were offloaded from our Challenger 2 onto the giant Turkish ship, the Mavi Marmara. Marmara, yeah. We were offloaded on there, and then our ship went on into Crete to get repaired. And as a result, I had the good fortune to be able to spend nearly 36 hours on the ship. 36 hours to get to meet the people that were on that ship, nearly 600 people that were on it, coordinated primarily by a Turkish NGO, a big NGO. It's called IHH, International Humanitarian Foundation. It's an NGO that has an international reach. They have projects all over the world for disaster assistance, for various kinds of relief. It's the organization that the Israeli government is saying that organization has ties with terrorism. It supports Hamas. IHH does have an office in Gaza, as do many NGOs, international NGOs. I met lots of people on that ship. I met some of the family members of the 9 persons who ultimately were killed in the Israeli assault on that ship. 9 people that were killed, 50 at least that were seriously wounded in an attack by the Israeli military. An attack that, in my opinion, should not have happened. We were in international waters. 70 miles off the shores of Gaza. The Israeli, who knows where the decision was made that an attack would take place in international waters. Was it by the Knesset committee that apparently had been briefed every single day about the plans for meeting these ships that were coming to break the Israeli blockade? Or was it a decision that was taken by the military commander on the scene, who for whatever reason decided that after his vessels had been trailing us for almost an hour, we could see their pin lights of their ships in the distance for well over an hour before finally about 4:30 in the morning, all of a sudden Zodiac boats filled with 10 to 15 young men, and I mean young. These were kids. These were 18, 19, 20-year-olds, just like we are sending to Iraq and Afghanistan young kids, 18, 19, 20 years old, who are scared when they are going on military operations, when they are busting down the doors of families in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And we could see the fear in the eyes of these young kids as they were coming aboard our ship. I had been transferred from the Marmara back onto the Challenger 1. The Challenger 1 had come from being repaired in Cyprus, and was carrying with it 3 German members of parliament and 1 Scottish member of the Scottish Parliament, and also a Scottish novelist by the name of Henny Mangle, a very famous author. Swedish, yes, Swedish. That's right, Swedish member of Parliament. Those people wanted to come onto the big ship, so we did a switch around about 12 hours before the attack. 3 of us came off the Marmara and went onto the small vessel, and the German members of Parliament and the Swedish member of Parliament came onto the big ship. So we did a switch around about 12 hours before the attack. 3 of us came off the Marmara and went onto the small vessel, and the German members of Parliament and the Swedish member of Parliament came onto the big ship. It's very interesting to read the account of members of Parliament who have now been on a ship that was attacked. Both the Germans and the Swedish members of Parliament have had press conferences in their respective countries about what happened. Our ship, the Challenger, was about 150 yards off the stern of the Marmara when it came under attack. It was the first vessel that was attacked by the Israeli naval forces, by the commandos, in not small Zodiac boats, those inflatable boats. These are big inflatable boats that will carry 15 to 20 heavily armed commandos in them that have speeds of 30 to 35 knots. We saw those ships approaching. The pictures that you're going to be seeing up in here of the ships, all of these photos are taken from the Free Gaza website. They don't really have uploaded yet some of the photos that you've seen in the paper about the actual attack. There are a few of them, but this is just kind of a general overview of some of the vessels that were purchased by Free Gaza, including the Rachel Corrie, the cargo ship that was now named for the young American woman who was run over by an American bulldozer operated by a member of the Israeli Defense Forces in March of 2003 in the city of Rafah, Gaza. That ship, and you will see see photographs of it being loaded in Ireland, loaded with supplies to go into Gaza to help reconstruct the damage of Gaza caused by the Israeli attack in 2008 and 2009. Back to the attack, though. When the Israeli military decided that it was going to stop all of these ships, all of these 6 ships in the flotilla, the Zodiac boats came up to the sides, to the stern, port, and starboard side of the Marmara. The people on board the ship were not going to roll out of red carpet, strangely enough. In fact, all of us, on all of our ships, we had talked about what we were going to do. We are people of peace. We were coming in peace. We were not carrying weapons. We were not going to be violent. But what do you do when people are storming your ship in international waters? Do you just stand back and say, okay, we've just spent millions of dollars to get these ships here. We have millions of dollars, over 10,000 tons of cargo, 1 million pounds of cargo. Oh, here it is. No, you don't do that. So we had all made decisions that we would act peacefully and nonviolently, but we would not just let people come on without saying something or putting our bodies in the way. And indeed, that's what we did on the Challenger. We had people that were on the outside of the boat that were standing in the way of the commandos and telling them, you are not welcome. This is international waters. You are not welcome. Do not come on board this ship. And what do you think the reaction was? Well, yes, that's right. They just came right aboard the ship, not physically first. They were throwing stun grenades, and you probably saw that on some of the footage that has been on TV from the stern of the Marmara. You know, it's a 6-story high ship. It's a big ship. It's a passenger ferry. It's a tall ship, and the commandos were throwing stun grenades up into it. Stun grenades, noise grenades that flash, that have huge sounds to them to disorient people. And I'll tell you, they do disorient you. They do. And when one of those was thrown through the window of our small boat, and all of a sudden the glass broke, and then all the stun grenade, boom, and then smoke coming out of it, and then followed by 15 commandos coming in from one side of the ship, and another set of commandos climbing up onto the top of our ship to secure the ship, to grab the captain and the wheelhouse, to stop. Well, actually, they didn't have to stop the ship. We had stopped our own boat because a large ship had come in front of us, showing that there are different ways that you can approach these things, that you don't have to use force. You can stop a ship without taking over the wheelhouse, that you can pull a ship in front of one and slow it down and stop it. And that's one of the things that I think we need to be concerned about, on how the Israeli military decided it was going to stop these ships. There were ways that they could have stopped them without boarding forcefully. And resulting in what now we now know, 9 deaths from it and 50 people that were injured. Better ways to do things than storming aboard these types of ships. For our ship, while all hell was breaking loose, pardon my French, on the Marmara, we were subdued by the forces that came on board our boat. We were all placed in a small cabin. We were immediately searched. Any electronics that we had, whether it was a cell phone, a camera, were taken immediately from us. During the course of the next 12 hours, as we ultimately started going toward the Israeli coast, all of our luggage was searched and every bit of electronic equipment taken not to be returned. I mean, all of us had computers that we were writing stories on, cameras that we were taking pictures of, cell phones that we had used. All of those items for every one of the 750 people that were on board, all of those 6 ships are gone. None have been returned. This is a brand new little computer right here. I have a brand new little cell phone in my pocket. I don't have a camera yet. But everyone, I mean, there is probably over $1 million worth of personal equipment that was taken. 60 journalists that were a part of this, that were on board the 6 ships. 60 of them, all with expensive cameras. Many of them documentary makers, TV production teams, very expensive equipment. On board our ship was an Australian Sydney Morning Herald reporter and a photojournalist, renowned journalists who were not accorded any sort of accommodation as being press, nor was anybody on any of those boats. They were handcuffed just like the rest of us. Their equipment was taken just like the rest of us, never to be returned to them. So we will be filing complaints with the Israeli government for not only piracy, kidnapping, murder, theft. I mean, the list is long of the things that the violations of international law, and I would say that the law of Israel too, of taking property that doesn't belong to you and not returning it. Now, some of the luggage that was taken off the Marmara, 600 people on that, each one of them was suitcases. The Israeli military said, well, we have to look at everything because we don't know. There may be weapons there. And they went through that place with a fine-tooth comb. They emptied out every single bag. They emptied out bales of materials that were being sent in for humanitarian assistance. All of them opened and dumped on the floor. And when suitcases were returned to Istanbul from the Marmara, they were laid out in a huge hall, and people from the Marmara were going through to find their suitcases, and some of them found suitcases that looked like theirs, but when they opened up the suitcase, nothing in it was theirs. All of the stuff that had been piled in giant piles had just been pulled out, stuffed in one, stuffed in another. The two of the boats, my boat and a boat that came out of Athens, Greece, we've not heard of any of the luggage from that, none of it all. But really, that's kind of the minor part of this whole thing, of our personal luggage. What really is important is the lives, the tragic loss of life that happened as 750 people were going on a humanitarian mission. And granted, it was a controversial mission. It was a mission that was to challenge government policies, the Israeli government policy, the American government policy that supports the Israeli siege on Gaza. We knew it was a definite threat to Israel, to their policy of holding a population hostage, really, to having a siege on a population, to put such pressure on the people of Gaza. And our purpose was to go and relieve that pressure. But instead, we were attacked. Was it a mission that was worth taking? Was it a mission worth raising all these millions and millions of dollars and buying these ships? Have we seen that there's been any sort of movement from any government about the siege of Gaza? Well, yes, I would say it's really been worth it. It's shown what citizen activism can do. It shows that where men and women around the world decide that they want to change something and they're willing to put their efforts into it, they're willing to fundraise, they're willing to coordinate nationally and internationally to bring such things as ships to challenge a siege, that indeed we can make some changes. We now have governments of this world who are saying publicly the siege must end. Not that the United States of America government is saying it quite like that yet. We still have to work on that. But we have other nations. I mean, the Norwegian government saying this must end. The Irish government, this must end. The French government saying the siege must end. And you have the Israeli government that today made a major change. It has now opened up the numbers of items that can now come into Gaza. It's now gone from something like 81 items, only 81 items could come into Gaza for these last many years. And they have put another, I think it's 50 items. Things like cookies, jam, I mean, some of strange things that have not ever been able to go into Gaza. The Israeli military that is now, I think, under great scrutiny, not only by the international community, but by the government of Israel, of the disproportionate use of force to the threats that are coming. And we certainly saw that during the CAS-led 22-day attack on Gaza, the disproportionate use of force. None of us condone, I don't think, the shooting of rockets, homemade, unguided rockets that are made in Gaza and are shot into Israel. I don't condone that at all. I'm sorry for the 30 people of Israel who over the past 6 years have been killed by those rockets. But when you look at the disproportionate use of force, where in 22 days the Israeli military using U.S. aircraft, F-16s, Apache helicopters, using ammunition, dime bombs, dense inert metal explosives that will slice a person in two, cluster bombs, white phosphorus. When you look at the disproportionate use of force, it's happened again. It happened on these ships. Now we do see on some of the video that when the commandos started rappelling down from the 3 helicopters that were hovering above the Mamre, that indeed they were met by men on the top of the deck that were there to protect the cabin, the captain's cabin, to try to prevent a takeover of that ship for as long as possible. And we did see that there were men that had broken broom handles and had sticks, and some of them had broken off pipes on the railings of that ship, and they beat some of those Israeli soldiers. I don't condone that at all. The captain of the ship actually came out. You know, part of that video, we saw part of it, 5 seconds maybe, of 3 or 4 of those Israeli soldiers really getting beaten up. But we don't see that next stage of it. What happened after 5 seconds? We don't see the part where the captain of the ship came out of the captain's cabin and said, "Stop this." And we don't see where the director of IHH, the Turkish NGO, came out and said, "We are not doing this. Stop this. That's not the way we are going to act. Stop beating those soldiers." And we didn't see initially the pictures of the soldiers being brought down to the first aid station that was on the ship. There are some of the photographs that you'll see in the very beginning of the slideshow that show an Israeli soldier that had blood coming off his face that was being treated by the first aid station on the ship. They were treated and they were returned to the Israeli military. It only took about 20 minutes for the Israeli military to take control of the biggest ship. It took about 30 seconds for them to take control of our little boat. The other 4 ships that were in the flotilla, it took anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes to gain control of them. The Israeli military was up against a bunch of peace activists that had their bodies. There was not one Israeli soldier that was shot. There were no weapons that were on board those ships that were pulled out and then used to fire on Israeli soldiers, because there were no weapons at all. Even the weapons that were taken from the Israeli soldiers were not turned on them. They were either thrown overboard or put in the captain's cabin with the ammunition out of it, and then subsequently returned to the Israeli military. The PR spin that the Israeli government has put on this, you know, they have a big PR machine, and they're working overtime to characterize the Israeli soldiers, the commandos, as the victims, that indeed they were attacked as they came on to the ships, as they boarded the ships in international waters. I think that is a very inaccurate characterization of what really had happened. To continue the story of what, after all 6 of the ships were secured by the Israeli military, we all were steamed then toward the Israeli port of Ashdod. Our boat, being the fastest, got in there the first, and our group of 17 people were the first ones to go through Israeli processing. You may have seen on YouTube some of the photographs of us as we were being taken off that boat. We do have a bone to pick with the Israeli government because by international law, the Geneva Conventions, prisoners are not to be paraded and photographed as they are being shepherded around. So that's another thing we're taking up with them. Those pictures were inappropriate. That if they take us prisoner, they're not supposed to take photographs that are for public consumption. On one level, though, I was kind of glad they got out because at least you all knew that you know, you could start tracking what people were, you know, some people were safe, but unfortunately not everyone was safe. After the processing of about 3 hours in a giant tent that had been specially set up for that, you know, we all knew that the Israeli government was making plans for the processing of people. They were going to bring the ships in, process all of us, and then ultimately deport us. The intermediate step was, though, to go to prison. And we ended up in a brand new prison in the town of Beersheba, which is kind of down in the desert. It was about an hour and a half drive from the port of Ashdod. Brand new prison. In fact, we were the ones that had to sweep it out. It still had construction dust in it. And we were the ones that had to sweep it and then put our cells together. And like in the United States, we always wonder, what are all these prisons for? You know, we just keep building more and more prisons, and we never really could get out of the Israeli officials who they intend to put in that prison after we left. But they have a big, brand new prison. We were treated reasonably in that prison. We had one woman prison guard who, responding to every one of our comments or questions or requests for this or that, the one word that she said back to us was shalit. Shalit. The name of the one Israeli soldier that has been captive in Gaza for the last 3 years. That was her response back to us. Over the hours, the days that we were there, about 2 days that we were there, she warmed up a little bit. After 2 days, deals were being struck by nations. We were visited by consular officers from the embassies. They were kept away from us for over 24 hours before they had first access to us. They saw us once. Some of us got one phone call home after the guards figured out how to use the brand new telephone system. They didn't even know how to use that. So it took a while to get the phone cards going and being able to make one telephone call in English for 1 minute. And most of the people that were brought off the ships didn't speak English. Most of them were from Turkey and didn't speak English. And so when they would make phone calls to their homes and start talking in English or in Turkish, then the guards would immediately cut off the phone call home. We had with us, I don't know, what is this? Oh, we're seeing video. Okay, great. One of the people that was with us in the prison, one of the women that was with us in our wing of the prison, was a woman whose husband had been killed in that attack. There was no special accommodation made for her as a widow who had closed her husband's eyes on the decks of that ship. She too was cuffed, was put out in the sun, the beating sun for hours before that ship got into the port of Ashdod. I had spoken with her on the very first day that I got on board the ship. She spoke some English. She and her husband both are martial arts specialists. And in fact, her husband had been the coach of the national taekwondo team. He was a volunteer. He worked with IHH, as did she. The men that were up on the top of that deck, the average age on the top of the deck was 50. These were not young kids. They were not young militants at all. They were older people who had been volunteering with IHH. One of the other people that was shot was the man that ran our press room. On board the ship were 20 laptops that were available for journalists to file their stories. This young man, 38 years old, he had been a journalist himself. Thank you. He'd been a journalist himself. He then started working as the webmaster for IHH, and he put together the internet system, a satellite internet system where people could file their stories and it would be uploaded by satellite. It was a system that was taken down by the Israelis as they were boarding the ship so that no information could get out about what was happening, except, gosh, you saw something, didn't you? You saw it. And that was because there was a backup satellite system, just in case. So that's how the images that you all got out, that you all saw, that's how they got out. But this young man, 38 years old, as the commandos came into the press room, he was shot right through the forehead. Of the 9 people that were killed, the 9 men that were killed, there was by the Turkish doctor who did the autopsy, there were 30 bullets in those bodies, 30. What do we do next? Where do we go from here? We've had a tremendous outpouring all over the world of demonstrations. In fact, how many of you all have participated in demonstrations either before the flotilla left or after it was attacked? Yes, and you represent millions of people all over the world. It's remarkable. I mean, when we left the airport in Turkey, at compliments of the government of Turkey, who flew us from Ben Gurion Airport in 3 chartered planes, all of the passengers with the exception of 30 that went to Greece. The rest of us got on Turkish planes and went to Istanbul. The papers that were in Istanbul, the international papers that were there, were filled with the photographs of all over the world where men and women just like you all had been demonstrating, had been protesting the takeover of these ships. So the world is alert. There are more people that are more concerned about Gaza now than ever, ever, ever. We've got to keep this pressure up. We've got to move while we have this. The tragic deaths of these men cannot go in vain. The wounding of 50 of other people. We have got to make sure that their deaths are not in vain, and we have got to put tremendous pressure on all the governments of the world and on the United Nations here. It's up to us to keep this pressure up. The group that formed the Flotilla, Free Gaza movement, they are men and women of such great spirit and conscience, and they have some more plans for us. So I would like to end my presentation by bringing up to you all a man who has spent so much of his life of trying to advocate for the Palestinians and who has been a part of the creation of 2 of the most extraordinary organizations of the international security movement and the Free Gaza. So please welcome Adam Shapiro.
Okay, well, thank you for the warm welcome. Just a quick correction, Anne. International Solidarity Movement. We want security for everybody, but International Solidarity Movement. For those of you standing, I see there are just a couple of seats still open. If you want to try to move in at this point, please do. It makes me nervous a little bit to see people standing, but anyway. I want to start, I think, picking up where Anne left off, where she was talking about the victims of the massacre at sea, and I don't think there's really any other word for it. If we could all just stand and have a moment of silence for the victims. Thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. I'm not here tonight to take names for the next flotilla. If you're interested in going, we certainly welcome participation from everybody who's interested in joining. You'll have to go to our website, freegaza.org or witnesstogaza.com. We don't yet have that set up, but in the future we will, and certainly we would love to see greater participation from Americans, United States citizens, from this country. Even I've already heard talk from some people about possibly organizing a quote-unquote American ship. I think that would, or maybe ships. I think that would be fantastic. So don't ask me if you could have a seat, because truly, although I am an organizer and I'm very much involved, when it comes to getting a seat on the boat, I'm the last person to talk to, actually. Other people do that. The second thing I'm also not going to talk about tonight, and really don't even want to, I mean, you could ask questions, feel free to ask questions, but honestly, this is not about Hamas. It's not about any of the Palestinian factions, for that matter. It's about Palestinians. It's about the people who live in the Palestinian territories. It's about them, and quite frankly, I think I can speak from some amount of experience that these leadership parties, these factions that everybody wants to talk about in the media and among the governments and all that, are so irrelevant to people's lives today that we really shouldn't waste our time too much talking about them. So if you're wondering, that's my kind of disclaimer. I've spent enough time in the last week trying to deal with questions about Hamas and this and that, and I'm not their spokesman. I'm happy to take a question if somebody insists, but let's try to focus on what we really should be focusing on. At least I think so. So what did we do this week or last week? And what have we been doing since August 2008? There's still some who think that what we were doing was trying to deliver humanitarian aid. And indeed, we were trying to deliver humanitarian aid, but not only humanitarian aid. We were also trying to deliver reconstruction material. We were trying to deliver paper for school books, textbooks. In a broad conceptualization of humanitarian aid, sure, I think that all of these things consist of humanitarian aid. But we were very much intentionally taking a political act by challenging the blockade itself. Not so much to just simply challenge it and be stopped, but to challenge it and break it. The point was to actually arrive in Gaza, despite the media and the propaganda about us that we were just seeking a provocation. No, we would have been perfectly happy for the Israelis to sail aside, move away, and we arrive in Gaza and come and go and come and go and come and go, and open Gaza to the world. Give Palestinians what they need the most, which is not medicine or wheelchairs or cement, but freedom. So that is the basic thing that they are denied, their basic human right that they are denied. While they have a right to medicine and food and all these things, and these things should not be kept from them, we need to keep in mind that this political act that we took was a response to the political act that Israel takes by making the blockade in the first place. It is Israel that has established that humanitarian aid is political by virtue of the blockade. And even before that, for 40 years, since 1967, it is the political act of the occupation that we also must challenge if we are going to seek to enable Palestinians to live free. And we need to remember that the blockade, the policies against Gaza, against Palestinians in Gaza, while the blockade itself is just a few years old, they are built upon a foundation of occupation that is now over 40 years old. And that is the root of the problem at this point that we need to dismantle in order to start moving towards freedom for Palestinians. So we took this political act, and we weren't using humanitarian aid. I want to make this clear. We weren't using humanitarian aid as a cover. It's Israel that's used humanitarian aid as a cover for its policies of blockade and siege and occupation. Ours was a response. And so in doing so, we forced the world to stand up and take notice. Now, I also want to be clear, because I think this is an important point, that is, we act in solidarity and we act to raise consciousness and awareness. I think there's just, this is a form almost of self-criticism to some extent, but I think it's something that's important to remember. That most likely tonight we would not be here, or at least not as many of us would be here. I certainly wouldn't have been on as much media this last week and a half as I have been, and perhaps nobody would have even bothered to pay attention had Israel just simply boarded the boats and not killed 9 people and not injured over 50. It's quite possible, because we've had other missions. We've had other missions that have been taken over. I was on a boat that was boarded. I was dragged off to prison for 10 days. And aside from a few more left-wing progressive kind of outlets, we were largely ignored. And had Israel chosen to take that method again to stop all of the ships, most likely we would have largely been ignored. Unfortunately, there's a very sharp lesson that can be drawn from this, that Palestinians have been drawing for quite a while, which is that it's only when violence is used that people sit up and pay attention, giving sort of credence to the old journalistic, mantra, if it bleeds, it leads. And as much as we like to deny that, as much as that offends our consciousness in a way, unfortunately, in some ways, it proves to be true over and over and over. And so we need to constantly call that out. We need to constantly remind ourselves that while we do need to respond to the emergency, that when there isn't an emergency, it doesn't mean that there isn't a crisis going on. And that doesn't demand our attention and response as well. And we're all, as I speak not from standing above and looking down, I stand from a position of equality in this. But we did change the world this week, I have to say. In part thanks to Israel's brutal response. But we did. And we did not only because of what happened to us as my colleagues were victimized and massacred, but because we were prepared. And it's funny because this time we were prepared better than ever. As Anne was mentioning, we had the satellite hookup so that people could see it live. People were prepared on the ships for the boarding. We were prepared with media spokespeople around the world. I've heard this described as if we are somehow like undermining the institutions, how they normally work, that somehow we figured out how to have spokespeople, and that this is somehow, I don't know, what's the word for it, like we're undermining the foundation of everything, right? Yes, we had spokespeople. I was here in the United States, in New York, ready to speak out and give voice, because we had to combat what we knew would be the official propaganda coming out. We were prepared for it. We were prepared ahead of time. We had all kinds of scenarios worked out in advance and knew what everybody would be doing. And while it sounds and looks to some extent like a well-oiled machine, it was also fairly chaotic on our end. But we still managed to get out our version. We still managed to get out raw, unedited footage. We still managed to get out the perspectives and witness of people who saw what happened, who could report firsthand. I was on the phone with Hueda, my wife, minutes before her ship was taken, and as she had already started witnessing what was happening to the Mavi Marmara, and was able to repeat that in the media. And this, in a sense, is a victory. It's a victory of preparation. It's a victory of being able to beat the Israelis at their own game. And we have to keep doing that. And we have to keep up the urgency in doing so. Tomorrow, one of the other survivors from the ship, Yar Ali, who's also an American citizen, is presenting raw footage that she was able to smuggle off the ship and keep throughout detention. Tomorrow at the UN, 4 p.m. If anybody's interested, you can show up. It's an open event. She'll be showing the footage. And we've invited the media to come and take a look at it. And sure enough, there is plenty of interest. Because one of the ways we've been able to sort of question the official policy, the official line that's coming out from Israel, is by raising doubts about their footage, raising doubts about their audio recordings that they're releasing. We've already proven one audio recording to be a complete sham. We've already proven pictures that they've put up on their websites and distributed to the media to be completely false. One picture as old as 4 years. And we're working currently on disproving or showing how some of the infrared footage has been doctored and may not even have been taken, that footage may not have even been taken on the night in question, but may have come from training exercises. So we're working on dismantling all of their propaganda that they're putting out there and supporting it with the eyewitness testimony that is coming out now from the survivors of the ship. But we also had diplomatic success as well. I don't recall a time in this conflict where there has been such immediate criticism, immediate condemnation of what Israel did. We had, the day after the attack, French Foreign Minister and French President Sarkozy coming out condemning the attack. We had statements coming out from Sweden, from Spain, from, of course, Turkey, from throughout, as the days passed, from Europe, throughout the rest of the world. Even when Gaza was under attack, during Operation Cast Lead, there was hardly a response of this kind. Again, there's kind of a cynical, ugly side to that, right? Which is that the lives of Palestinians are not worth as much as the lives of foreigners. And we have to call that out. Every time we have to call that out. And we do. President Obama, not to give him too much credit, but he even canceled, and although the media spin and the public announcement was that Netanyahu canceled the meeting with him, my sources in Washington tell me it was the other way, that it was Obama who canceled the meeting, that there was no way he was going to be shaking hands and taking photos with Netanyahu on the White House lawn the day after this attack took place. I think we need to not necessarily applaud or give congratulations for the president for that, but what we need to do is keep the pressure up. Unfortunately, the statement from the United States so far about the deaths on the boat are that they are regrettable. And just to give you something to counter, sort of contrast that with, the statements by Helen Thomas were called reprehensible. Making a statement in front of a camera that, who knows if she knew what she was doing really at that moment, is reprehensible. Intentionally killing 9 people is regrettable. So we need to call out the White House and keep pressure on it as a result. And frankly, I think that there was a mistake made, with good intentions perhaps, when the Security Council convened its first meeting, the one that went late into the night, the first night after the ship was attacked. And I think it was a mistake because although they met for a long time and ultimately came out calling for an investigation, the statement was very weak. Had they waited just 24 hours or 36 hours, we would have learned that by that point we would have had the information that one of the victims was an American citizen. And that could very well, without hoping for too much, have changed at least part of the US position during that Security Council meeting. So although the Security Council took the issue up right away, it perhaps was a strategic mistake until we knew the identity of those who were killed. And I think that's an important lesson for us to reach out when we speak to our supporters and our allies and people in different offices of power, that we need to point these kind of things out so that in the future, and we know there'll be a future of this, right? We know that we will continue to challenge. We know that there will continue to be protests and demonstrations in the West Bank by Palestinians, by their foreign international supporters, and even by their Israeli supporters. And we know that there'll be more boats, so we have to be prepared for the future. That's something else to take into account. So far, we need to keep pushing the United States. It's already moved in its position. Its first position was for an Israeli investigation. Now it's moved to a position of an Israeli investigation, impartial, with an American observer. When Ban Ki-moon later this week called for an independent investigation that he was going to appoint a team with an Israeli, an American, and a Turkish observer, that was also something the United States started supporting. So we've seen movement in the American position, I believe because of the pressure we're keeping up on them, on this administration. So we need to keep doing that. Now, things are different today than they were before the ships went. The blockade is now an issue. The reality of people's lives in Gaza are an issue that people are paying attention to. All this propaganda and bogus information about that there's not a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, all of that is being exploded day by day as more and more information is coming out. When President Obama says there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza, do they expect on Fox News that people are going to listen to Charles Krauthammer instead of President Obama? And anyway, we have Jon Stewart on our side. So we just got to get him on the next boat. So if anybody knows Jon Stewart, tell him we want him. So now we have to think about the next steps and what is needed. We, Free Gaza, with our partners, and we had 5 organizations, including IHH, the Turkish organization, but we also had 4 others, joined together to form this coalition. We had dozens, if not hundreds, of other organizations participate in a variety of ways, whether it was donating cargo, sending a member of their organization on the trip, raising money, doing media work, whatever. We had hundreds of people from around organizations from around the world representing literally millions of people supporting this mission. And now it's even bigger, right? In the last week, we've had offers from everywhere from Hong Kong to Chile to Brazil to Iceland to you name it. We've had people offering to organize a ship, to raise money, to send cargo, whatever. This is truly a global movement. And in that sense, is an escalation on our part from, I think, what was the global response to the attacks on Gaza in December 2008, January 2009, when there was the beginning of a uprising globally. We could call it a global intifada. I think that's not too strong of a term to use at this point. Of what we're seeing is complete outrage, complete disgust with ongoing Israeli brutality, not only against Palestinians, but now increasingly against foreign civilians, foreigners who seek to who help, to seek to bring support, who are working for peace and who are working for justice, or peace with justice. The day after the flotilla, another American citizen, Emily, and I forget her last name, I can never remember, I'm sorry, student here at Cooper Union in New York, and I know she's back in the United States now, shot in the face after being shot at with 2 tear gas canisters at her feet, was then targeted and shot in the face with a tear gas canister, and she's lost her left eye as a result. Again, initially not a word from the United States about its own citizens. This is something, particularly with the United States government, that we have to really take up. And this is why having a bigger American contingent, US contingent, on the next mission is so critically important. We have elevated the pressure on Israel. We have elevated the pressure on other countries in Europe, especially. And now we need to really elevate the pressure here in the United States, not just doing work here, but by sending people out and joining the flotilla. To give an honest assessment of where we stand right now as Free Gaza and as our coalition, while there has been tremendous support coming forward from around the world and offers of support, as Anne mentioned at the very beginning of her statement, it really is something extraordinary as an activist group without an office, maybe even now without a bank account, because it seems that Cyprus has given into pressure and is closing our bank account in Cyprus, that we were able to raise the money for the ships that we did for this last mission. But now we have no ships. Well, we have one, the Challenger 2, that was sabotaged and is still being repaired. But aside from that one small ship, we actually have no ships right now. None of our partners do. So we have to start anew. We have to build our fleet again. We hope through legal action and diplomatic pressure to be able to get the ships back, the ones that Israel is currently holding, but they've been holding one of our ships since July 2009. They've been holding a Lebanese ship since February 2009. So we don't have a lot of confidence that we'll get it back, but we have to try again. And so that's going to take some time. We do hope to be able to launch another mission before the end of the summer as a means of keeping up the pressure, as a means of launching yet another flotilla. And we will devise a strategy to meet what we think are the changing conditions and based on the lessons that we've learned, and we've learned a lot of lessons from this last mission. And we will come up with a strategy that will, at base, at the foundation, will do the same thing that all of our missions have done, which is basically to present Israel with a lose-lose situation, right? On the one hand, it could stand aside, as it did with our first 5 missions, and our ships will enter Gaza unimpeded, deliver the humanitarian aid, the cargo that we bring, whatever is on board. Sometimes we've brought Palestinians back to Gaza, Palestinians who've been trapped outside of Gaza and unable to rejoin their families. Sometimes we've taken out of Gaza Palestinians who need medical attention and who can't get it, students who have scholarships to study at university around the world, and we brought them out to go and study. And that is something we hope to be able to continue doing. That if Israel stands aside and doesn't interfere, then we win. We do what we set out to do. We are opening Gaza to the world, giving Palestinians freedom and the freedom of movement. Not all, but hopefully increasing it. The second loss is that if Israel does stop the ships, that it will be exposing to the world its policy of brutality towards the Palestinians. And then, of course, it's not just our job as the organizers, it's the work of all of us as supporters of these missions around the world to engage, to contact their media, to raise awareness in their communities that this is what prison looks like. In any prison, you don't find the prisoners, well, in some prisons you do, but in many prisons you don't find the prisoners starving. And the same is true in Gaza. The Palestinians are not starving. They're not starving not only because, and not really because Israel lets in 100 trucks a day. They're not starving because we need to recognize that Palestinians have actually figured out how to break the blockade. They do it through the tunnels. And they've established this tunnel network to bring in the things that they need in Gaza to survive. And we should give credit to the Palestinians, right? That they have figured out how to break the blockade. And, we can support that. But it is a sad state of affairs if people have to exist underground in order to be able to survive, in order to be able to stave off starvation, malnutrition, anemia, all other kinds of diseases that are starting to rise up in Gaza. So we must break this blockade above ground, in the open, and through whatever means that we have at our disposal. As my wife Hueda likes to say, we are the international community. It's not just these governments or states or the UN. We are the international community. And I think we can act to do so. Now, you may not get it from tonight because of this talk so far, but normally I'm one of the most pessimistic people you can meet. I'm normally one of the most cynical people about this stuff, even though I'm an activist, even though I do this all the time, and it's kind of dissonance, right, between my activism and my kind of outlook. But I've been saying this now for probably about a year, because I really believe it at this point, that while not being too hopeful, while not being too optimistic about the situation, I think if we stand back and look at what's happening today, and I would even have said this before this flotilla went, what we have today is a situation where momentum is on our side, where momentum is on the side of justice, of freedom for the Palestinians, and for an end to these policies of blockade, of siege, of occupation, of oppression, of apartheid-type systems, of second-class citizenship, of all of that. Now, just because momentum is on our side doesn't mean we're winning, right? The starting points are so vastly different. Starting points are kind of like this. I mean, it's not even an accurate representation, really. But we're moving this way, and Israel's policies, Israel's governments, Israel, dare I say, even the Israeli public, which really so far is acquiescent to its government for the most part, is moving this way. And what we're seeing in terms of action and activity around the world, the support we see for the flotilla, the outrage, the demonstrations, the kinds of civil society efforts to support Palestine, to support Palestinians, is all part of this momentum going this way. And I think one of the most important aspects of this work that's changing the momentum is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which I encourage you all, if you don't know about, maybe you do, to start engaging with, to look up, to read the points of unity, to read the principles, and to read the call from Palestinian society for boycott, divestment, and sanction. And I just want to note, I was just talking to my friend Udi, who's in the back, about this earlier. It seems today that the Israeli government has started taking steps, the Israeli Knesset, to criminalize activities for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in Israel. So if you are an Israeli, and there are Israelis who support BDS, this will now become an illegal activity. And if you are an American or anybody else who's active in BDS, you of course will no longer be allowed into the country, meaning you won't be able to get to the West Bank. Gaza is still a little bit different because of the situation with Egypt, but it's now becoming criminal to work on BDS. And just this past weekend, the main organizer of cultural and musical acts in Israel, Shuki Weiss, who's a promoter, took it to the next level, and he called boycott and of the cultural boycott a form of cultural terrorism. Because Israelis are suffering because they can't hear the music of the Pixies and of Elvis Costello and I don't know who else. I guess Leonard Cohen is still willing to go and do his thing, but we need to step that up, and it is stepping up. And I think just the response from artists, from people like the Pixies and the Gorillaz and other acts who've already suspended their tours to Israel in response to this brutal attack on the flotilla, is encouraging. But we need to step it up even more. So I'm gonna kind of stop here and leave time for questions. But basically, in conclusion, the tide is turning. The more that we can make this a conflict between Israel and the rest of the world, and less of a conflict between Israel. You heard the Israeli spokespeople all week, Michael Oren and others. They want this to be always about Hamas. And if Hamas wasn't there, it would be about Fatah. And if Fatah wasn't there, it would be about PFLP. And if it wasn't PFLP, there's always going to be somebody that Israel wants to make this about. And the more that we can make this not about Palestinians, although it is ultimately about Palestinians, but the more that we can make this conflict a conflict between, as happened in South Africa, the more we can make this a conflict between Israel as a pariah state and the rest of the world standing up for justice, the more we win. Thank you very much. No, I'm okay.
Good evening. This is really thrilling to, I stood up here and tried counting, but I lost track of everyone because the room is so full. But we're, I think, going close to between 200 and 300 people in this room. So give yourselves a hand for coming out, because as I think Adam and Anne would agree with me, you are as important in this room now as the two people that just spoke. We together are going to form a collective force to go up against the brutal force of the Israeli government and their military policy that's exhibiting their use of absolute abusive power unless we collectively and internationally stop them. And we have some governments now that are standing up, but it will be, as Adam said, civil society that is going to move this in a different direction. And we have our work cut out, but I believe if we don't lose the momentum, and I think the most important thing is not just to show up because there seems to be an emergency or a crisis in the media, or this is a horrible thing that we just witnessed, but 9 people were killed, over 1,400 people were killed in Gaza. People are dying in Palestine every day, and we don't always get they don't always get the media attention that this crisis did bring to the public, but we cannot forget it. We cannot let a week go by and have the short attention span that they want us to have. So I'm going to now open it up to questions.
Tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the halls of Congress, we're going to be going to Representative Brad Sherman's office. He's the guy who is kind of the equivalent of what they're doing in Israel, which is they're making it a crime that you do BDS. Well, Brad Sherman said that all of us who are associated with the Free Gaza Flotilla ought to be arrested and go to jail. So all of us that have been a part of that are going to show up in his office and just say, "Arrest us."
Okay, Dorothy?
I wish you would talk about the question of weapons on the ships. There is a horrible video going around in French, but passed by the Israelis, purporting to show them unloading all of these weapons, boxes and crates and so forth. So could you give us some hard information so we can carry that to the public?
The Israelis have done that for us, actually. The Israeli government brought all the media in Israel, including the foreign media, and this was shown on ABC News, NBC News, I think CBS, CNN, I think was there, unloading the ship. And what they showed was wheelchairs and crutches and, you know, cement and paper and all that stuff. And the final tally from the Israelis is that there were no weapons on the ship, which, by the way, conforms with the inspections that were done in all the ports from which we left. All of the records from the inspectors were made public, were on our website, were made available for anybody to view and inspect. And basically, Israel's assertion that they didn't trust these inspections is basically Israel saying that it doesn't trust the EU, right? Because it's from European ports that we left, it's according to EU regulations that these ships are inspected. And the same is true for the Turks. Although Turkey is not a member of the EU, its ports and its the airport and things like that are all according to EU regulations as part of Turkey's effort to join the EU and other agreements Turkey has with Europe. So when they talk about, Israel talks about having a neutral third party or having another mechanism to inspect the ships, we already have that. We didn't inspect the ships, the EU did. So all of this can be used to counter these kinds of claims.
This woman in the brown? You? Yes, I don't know your name.
I have three very quick questions. One, what is the timeline of the actual killings vis-a-vis the soldiers repelling on the ship? Because I've never heard anyone talk about that. Two, why would Israel engage in so much violence when they knew it was going to be a PR disaster? Are they just the Keystone Cops with violence Tourette's, or like did they think they'd get away with it, or are they just used to getting away with that kind of stuff? And three, Representative Brian Baird, has talked about a Gaza airlift to, and is anyone thinking about airplanes? Because that'd be harder to board.
Sure, the question. One, what was the timeline of the killings when they came on the boats? Two, or that boat in particular, why did they kill? Why did they use such violence? And then Representative Baird has called for a kind of Gaza airlift. Have we thought about using airplanes? And I'm going to recruit you to fundraise for airplanes if you're not careful. No, I'll answer the questions in reverse order. With regards to the airplanes, airplanes are not feasible. There's two reasons. One is because when you take off from an airport, you have to file your flight plan. In order to file a flight plan, you have to have clearance to fly over the airspace that you're traveling over. To land in Gaza, you have to fly over Egypt to land the plane. Egypt's not going to give approval. Secondly, you can't, if you say that Gaza is your destination, no airport you take off from is going to let you take off. So airplanes are not an option. But there's another
There's no runway.
Well, the runway, yeah, the runway's damaged. It potentially could be fixed. But there is another air option. I'm not going to divulge what that is right now, but keep your eyes open. We're looking at it. I've had actually serious conversations with companies who have these airships. But okay, now why kill or why use this kind of violence? And it's all speculation. We do know that beforehand, Israeli officials, defense minister, foreign minister, deputy foreign minister, deputy defense minister, all said that they would use any force necessary and stop the ships at any cost. So we do think that there was premeditation to use violence against the ships. Secondly, we think that perhaps because our missions were growing and getting bigger, that there was at least the possibility that they had the incentive to try to make people think twice about doing this again. And just stopping the ships wasn't doing that. So perhaps that was some of the logic behind it. Or perhaps there is no logic behind it. This is a right-wing extreme government, and like any right-wing extreme government, anywhere in the world, anytime in history, they only know how to use the language of force. And that's what we saw. So I think, you know, a combination of these reasons, or any one of them, might be, but again, you know, we can't answer that question. The Israelis need to be held accountable to answer this question. In terms of the timeline of the killings, well, we're still compiling the eyewitness testimony to try to construct a good timeline, so I don't want to speculate too much. But what we do know is that the soldiers were firing live ammunition from the helicopter. And we do know that at least one person was killed on the ship before anybody among our passengers picked up any kind of chair or broomstick or whatever to defend themselves. So that much is clear. That much was captured on the footage. That much was reported live by Al Jazeera at the time it happened. So, but we are trying to still reconstruct all the events from the eyewitness testimony.
Dennis?
Just to put salt into the wound, Kathy Sheets, another manager, just told me that her credit card was charged $20,000 in Tel Aviv. So, in addition to, I thought they were going to confiscate the ship to get rid of the crime scene, per se, but they're now releasing it, presumably, to the Israeli public, just so you are aware what they're up to. And I hope you collect information about this also.
Yes, there were virtually everyone on the two ships, other than the Marmara, came off the ships with only your passport in your pocket. That was it. All of your identification, all your credit cards, everything was left on the ship. The soldiers said you are not taking it off, and of course we were, you know, you don't like to leave your stuff like that, but when you have a rifle pointed at you, you leave it. Remarkably, some of the identification emerged in 2 bags that were brought to Istanbul. One of Kathy's credit cards was not in that bag, and indeed it has been run up. But on the Marmara itself, the passengers there were able to keep their identification, their fanny packs, and small bags. But there's a lot of, I mean, well over $1 million worth of equipment that is gone right now. So we're making formal démarches through our governments, you know, to the Israeli government to try to get this stuff back.
What I'm wondering is there any chance, frankly, just to, since the EU takes upon itself the responsibility of inspecting the cargo, to just accept ships as flotilla ready and start sending them in 1 week after the other, or in any kind of arrangement that the Free Gaza organization is comfortable with. Because, as you say, here's the momentum. And also let the particular country maybe take responsibility for fundraising, loading the ships, and just start sending them in.
Yes, the question was, is there a way to have ships kind of like, since there's momentum now, ready to go, and as they get ready, just send them one after the other, and have countries specifically just raise money internally and send a ship. And yes, that's happening. People are raising money. There was, as part of this flotilla, a Greek ship and a Swedish ship, and an Irish, kind of an Irish ship. That's happening, and those will happen. Now the question is, strategically, does it make sense to send one ship at a time? And since we've already been down that path, like we already sent 8 missions with only 1 or 2 ships, we do believe that while, you know, you could do it and do it once a week, that we get more impact by sending a bigger number of ships and actually make not just a much bigger impact, it requires a much bigger response by the Israelis. It costs them, obviously, to launch this kind of response. And I think strategically, bigger numbers make more sense. In fact, I'm starting to think that having one ship with 600 people on it isn't as useful as having 6 ships with 100 people on it. So we're going to even, like I said, we've learned a lot of lessons. We're reviewing a lot of things to figure out what is the next step strategically for us to do. I also want to say that there's one thing I learned from the media this week, actually, which was, and this fits into our strategy. When the Rachel Corrie was going, on its own. We didn't actually have journalists on board because, well, for a few reasons. But at the last minute, we were trying to get some journalists to maybe fly out to the ship and to drop down onto it. And in the end, although there was a lot of interest from CNN and from the major media here, serious interest, they decided in the end that they couldn't join just one ship. Because by going on one ship, they would start looking like they were participants and not sort of the media observing it. So they would go on a ship if it was part of a flotilla of 6 ships or of 3 ships. But to go on one ship was kind of, they felt, crossing the line between. And I don't think that was just an excuse not to go. I really know that CNN was very interested in putting journalists on board. And had we had a second ship, even just a second ship for the Rachel Corrie, they would have sent people. So that's a lesson to us to know that in order to be able to bring the kind of media that we want, we need to have, you know, a group of ships at the same time. The question was, what's the response from our friends and colleagues in Gaza? And of course, first and foremost, is profound sadness and sympathy and empathy for the families of the victims. I mean, it was truly kind of shocking in a way. I mean, you would think the people who would be least shocked are Palestinians in Gaza at this kind of violence, but nonetheless they were. And so there was a profound sense of sympathy from, I mean, I was getting condolences, and I'm sure in Turkey they were getting condolences from all over the place. There was quite a bit of concern that, you know, for the people who were still in prison, because initially people were held incommunicado. I didn't have communication with my wife for the first over 48 hours and didn't know what was happening to her. So, you know, the outpouring of sympathy from people who, you know, are kept in a cage and, you know, subject to these kinds of conditions is just so amazing to experience. People in Gaza obviously want us to continue. I mean, there's no doubt about that. They want us to continue to break the blockade. They feel empowered by what we've done. They feel strengthened by this kind of exhibit of solidarity and support. And I'll just say, like many months ago when we first were trying to raise money for the cargo ship, we asked people in Gaza, we said, look, it might cost us $300,000. It may cost us $400,000 to get a cargo ship. Do you want us to raise the money for a cargo ship that may get stopped and taken away from us? Or do you want us to use that money to try to get, you know, medicine into Gaza or something else? And to a person, I mean, and we consulted with a wide variety of people. Not one person said, no, don't get a ship. People in Gaza understand this is political, that this is about challenging Israel and challenging its policies, and that it's something for us in solidarity that we can do from the outside to do it this way. So there was a tremendous amount of support. I can tell you, people in Gaza all the fishing ships were outfitted with flags, with banners, with all these kinds of things, ready to sail out and meet us as far out as they could get when the flotilla was due to arrive. There was a tremendous amount of energy and excitement in Gaza. And so, of course, there was disappointment, but obviously the disappointment was replaced by shock and horror as well.
Are you and the organizing group you work with aware of the fact that the South African trade unionists and longshoremen have joined with the Danish longshore trade union, refusing to handle goods that are destined for Israel? And I would hope that your group could play a role in extending this effective type of boycott of all goods to Israel by communicating with other longshoremen's unions in other countries, expressing gratitude, our gratitude, your gratitude to those unions for taking this heroic, courageous action in support of the ships, the flotillas, and including perhaps as signatories to your letters to these folks, some of the Jewish peace groups that that called me to this meeting, for example, like Jewish Voices for Peace, that might do a lot to neutralize phony arguments that might be raised within the unions. And the second thing is, I hope that we recognize, you and all doing this work, that the United States should be considered a priority, not just because we're here, a priority target from which to launch a ship, a flotilla, but because the United States is the greatest enabler of Israeli murderous politics for the last 40 years.
This is something that we have tried with not just these kinds of unions that work at the ports, but also other unions as well. The Postal Workers Union in Canada has joined the boycott already, teachers' unions in different countries. This is definitely something we are trying to support and encourage and reach out to our networks. But honestly, there are 9 of us who work in Free Gaza, volunteer, and do all of it, right? I mean, there are our coalition partners handle their ends of things. So, you know, there's a lot to do and not a lot of us. Now, that's why we feel it's so important, and as I mentioned, about being an international community and the work that we can do. This is something we can all do. It's something that doesn't require Free Gaza to take the initiative to do. It requires somebody picking up the phone or sending an email to somebody they know or somebody who they know knows somebody in a union, in something, somewhere, and pushing it and going with it. And if anything, you know, as I think Anne can testify from the people on the boats, when you're on the boat, you feel empowered by being on the boat and by doing something active. But that's not the only kind of activity. This kind of activity, attending these things, going out and doing things, writing to letters, obviously, you know, if you think writing to your congressman is a good thing to do, go ahead and do it. I don't, but that's just me. Of course, my congress people here in New York, not the most responsive people. But writing to unions, writing, you know, in your communities, your churches, your places of faith, and certainly pointing out, as much as, you know, it's kind of annoying to have to do this, that we have to in some way, you know, it's not to justify our activity or support for justice by raising up the point that there are Jewish groups who support this, but as a way to shut down any kind of bogus claims of anti-Semitism, we should point out all of the Jewish participants that are involved in this kind of work, and increasingly Israeli participants that are involved in this work, to really, you know, expose that argument for the hypocritical position that it is, and to move beyond it into the part of doing the action, taking the steps necessary to impose boycott and to impose sanctions on Israel.
In the back there.
I want to thank you, Anne, for being here. And you've mentioned BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, a couple times. I just wanted to let everyone here know that there is an event happening on Tuesday, June 15th. It's a debate/discussion of different Jewish perspectives on BDS, geared towards Jewish community, but everyone's welcome. It's at 7 o'clock next Tuesday at a church at 93rd and Broadway. Trinity Lutheran Church. What? Advent. 93rd and Broadway, 7 o'clock on Tuesday. A couple people speaking in favor of BDS, myself included, and a couple people against.
The question was, where is this policy, Israel's policies leading it in terms of its relationships in the Middle East, and in particular Turkey? And I think Turkey we can consider separate in this regard from the rest of the region, because Israel has a different relationship already with Turkey in terms of its military cooperation and its diplomatic relationship. And what we're seeing, I think, is you know, and this has been going on for a while, is a deterioration in the diplomatic relationship, and to some extent in the military relationship. But I would dare to say that we need to sort of remember that there are a lot of other interests at stake, including various business interests and military interests at stake, that far exceed any concern for Palestinians, right? And to some extent even exceed concern for Turkish citizens who lost their lives. So while I do expect that there will be some repercussions and maybe even a deterioration or a reducing of diplomatic relationship between Israel and Turkey, and maybe for a while even a cooling of the kind of military cooperation that exists, long term, I don't expect that too much will be different, except for the fact that Turkey is trying to play a greater role in the region in general. This is something that Israel isn't too keen on. And so, you know, there is a certain factor that is unknown at this point in what direction that will go. I think also Turkey is, in terms of the EU, is sort of reevaluating its consideration of EU just because the euro is proven such a disaster and everything with Greece. So that might play a factor as well. With the Arab countries, look, I mean, the Arab countries are largely doing business with Israel. Not all of them, but most of them. And for the most part, that's unaffected. The one place in the world where we see boycott completely non-existent is in the Arab world, right? We know that there are Israeli companies. I spent a lot of time in Dubai over the last couple of years. In Dubai, there's the largest Israeli private, support, one of the largest Israeli private supporters for settlements, Lev Levayev, who makes diamonds, who we protest here in New York. He has his diamonds on display, bold, lettering on the stores saying this is his diamonds. We've called for boycott in Dubai. We've tried to approach the authorities based on the Arab boycott principles. They just ignore it. They don't care. Even articles have been written in the newspapers there, which is really something shocking, and still it hasn't made a difference. Maybe after this situation where there is now greater pressure among Arab publics, and certainly among Arab elites even, there's pressure, maybe that will change, but I don't really actually have a lot of hope for that, to be honest. And I don't necessarily think that Israel really cares too much about that kind of pressure. I think the places we need to get pressure, certainly Turkey matters, certainly Europe matters, certainly the United States matters, as far as Israel is concerned. Of course, all of us can join internationally, supporting each other and working together. That's important, and that does matter. But as far as Israel's main considerations, it's the United States first, it's Europe second, and then other places third.
This will be the last question in the back.
What happened in the flotilla as I think, a valuable lesson that we can show the world how Israel continuously tries to criminalize resistance to occupation, resistance to a burglar that comes into your own home and threatens you, shoots you, kills members of your family. And the analogy between that and what happened with the occupation of Palestine, colonializing Palestine, and then criminalizing the resistance to it, and criminalizing the volunteers on the flotilla as terrorists, and all the names they've used to say they've resisted us, they acted violently. And I think it's an opportunity to actually talk more clearly about the legitimacy of resistance to a colonial power occupying and taking what's not theirs to begin with. So that is a comment. And my question specifically for future maybe flotillas and future ships, I was kind of listening to the comments made regarding the Rachel Corrie, and the statements that have been made that they will not resist, and keeping it very clear that they will not resist being boarded, almost like, and I realize some of that is Israeli propaganda that criminalizes the resistance. But looking into the future, I think statements like these and holding it in contrast to those that lawfully have every right to resist any Israeli incursion on what's
actually, these comments that were made and attributed to passengers on the Rachel Corrie were most unfortunate, were made without consultation with the board of directors, those of us who were organizing the mission, and were comments saying that the people on board the ship will not resist, that they were peaceful, that they will not make, there was a quote on CNN saying that they will not make silly mistakes like the people on the Turkish boat. We can't completely disassociate ourselves as much as we'd like to, because they were on our ship and we put them there. But those comments do not reflect Free Gaza. It does not reflect our mission, our statement, our positions, and it does not reflect our partners. And it is the most unfortunate that these statements were made, and we are demanding and we're urging the people who made those statements, and already there's been a retraction of at least one of them, for them to issue a public statement about this. The only thing I can say in their defense, and not to defend them too much, is that the people were at sea for about a week, and on a cargo ship is not the most comfortable place to be, and it's certainly disorienting. They were cut off from media, and so from seeing what was happening in the media, and from seeing what was happening, they weren't fully appraised of the situation of what happened on the Turkish ship. So it's not a defense, but it's at least a little bit understandable. But again, our position is, our official position, what we believe in, is that not only do our people, but the Palestinians also have, by international law, the right to resist their occupation and the policies against them. But furthermore, Furthermore, this attack in international waters is, forget talking about resistance, this is self-defense. And this is a principle of international law, and pretty much every international lawyer that is speaking out about this incident is affirming that we had the right to self-defense when we were attacked, and not even when they fired a bullet, when the commandos started to come on board and attack our ship.
And as we close, I just want to know how many of you all want to get a ship from the United States of America to sail to Gaza? Yay! Okay, so how do we do it? How do we do this? I mean, it costs a lot of money. Adam and his team have been raising money for so long to get those other ships out there. How are we going to do this? Well, let's do that. Let's set a goal. Let's set $500,000 to get us a ship, and let's go to Gaza in the next 6 months. Hey! Okay.
I just wanted to follow up with one thought about that, because I think that, you know, when you, this man in front, the first thing he asked, and I think it's in all of our minds, is what's next and what can we do? And I think we know what to do. I think that can be our focus and our goal. And I heard, I read something somewhere where somebody had said, and maybe this was on something that Anne wrote, there was a suggestion to name the boat the Audacity of Hope and have it sail into Gaza and let the media call that boat the Audacity of Hope. And we could have another one, Dreams from My Father, or My Palestinian Father, right behind. So, we can do this. And let me say that the Israeli government spent all those days keeping these people hostage so that they could run with the media. And the one thing they put in everybody's mind is that those boats were carrying weapons. Well, isn't it a dark irony that right up the coastline, our ships are bringing them weapons every single day or week, weapons that they used against these people and weapons that they use in the occupied territories and in Gaza. We will bring ships from this country and we will say, we are not bringing weapons from this country. We are bringing aid and we are breaking that blockade. And that's what we should do now. Stay focused. Don't lose the focus now. You know what you can do. Let's raise the money for all those people willing. Let's go on those boats and let's bring an American ship into Gaza that isn't bringing weapons to Israel.